New manager banned my lazy fixes, so I followed the manual and cost the company $200,000 in one day. The bottling plant was a loud, aggressive place. It didn't have a volume knob. It was just a constant, deafening wall of sound where 600 glass bottles collided every single minute. The air was filled with the hiss of pneumatic pistons and the high-pitched whine of conveyor motors fighting against friction. Jack stood on the catwalk overlooking the production floor. He was wearing steel-toed boots that had been scuffed down to the gray leather and a blue work shirt stained with years of grease. He had been the lead engineer at this plant for 15 years. He didn't carry a clipboard like the managers. He carried a heavy crescent wrench in his back pocket and a cotton rag in his front pocket. He was listening to Line 4 running at high speed. To anyone else, it was just noise, but Jack heard the rhythm. He knew that if the labeler was running low on glue, it made a specific tearing sound. If the filler bearing was getting hot, the metal grating under his feet would vibrate at a different frequency. Right now it sounded fine. The rhythm was solid. He walked down the metal stairs, running his hand along the yellow safety rail. He nodded to the operators as he passed. They nodded back, but no one tried to talk. You couldn't hear a human voice over the machinery anyway, unless you screamed. Jack walked into the control room, a glass-walled box sitting in the center of the factory floor. It was the only place in the building where the noise dropped to a dull roar. He poured himself a cup of coffee from the pot in the corner. It was burnt and sludge-like, but he drank it black. He sat in the worn office chair and put his feet up on the desk, scanning the bank of monitors on the wall. They showed green lights across the board. The line was healthy. The door behind him opened with aggressive speed. Jack didn't turn around immediately. He took a sip of his coffee, recognizing the smell of expensive cologne cutting through the scent of machine oil. Comfortable. Jack lowered his feet and swiveled the chair around. Brad was standing in the doorway. He was 26 years old, fresh out of business school, wearing a high-visibility vest that looked like it had never seen a speck of dust. He was holding a clipboard against his chest like a shield. He had been the plant manager for exactly 3 weeks. "Morning, Brad," Jack said. Brad didn't smile. He looked at the coffee cup, then at the chair, and finally at the monitors. "I've been walking the floor for 20 minutes, Brad said, his voice tight. "I haven't seen you touch a single machine." "That's because they're working," Jack replied. Brad walked over to the window and looked out at the operators hustling to move cases of soda onto the pallets. "My philosophy is simple, Jack," Brad said, turning back to face him. "If you have time to lean, you have time to clean. The company pays you a lead engineer's salary. That's a lot of money to pay a man to sit in a chair." Jack set the cup down on the desk. "Brad," Jack said, keeping his voice even, "you pay me for what I know, not for how much I sweat. If I'm sitting down, it means the line is running and making money. If I'm running around with a wrench, it means the line is stopped and we're losing money. You want me in this chair." Brad adjusted his safety glasses, which were sliding down his nose. "I want you to look professional," Brad said. "Dave might have let you run this place like a clubhouse, but Dave is gone. I want to see engagement. I want to see you following protocol. No more coasting." He tapped his clipboard with a pen for emphasis. "Find something to do, Jack, or I'll find someone else to do it." Brad turned and walked out, letting the door slam shut behind him. Jack looked back at the green lights on the monitor and finished his coffee. The breaking point happened on a Tuesday morning at 10 a.m. The plant was running a rush order for their biggest client. There were semi-trucks idling in the loading dock, waiting for the pallets, and every minute of production counted. Jack was out on the floor, standing near the labeler machine. Suddenly, the alarm sounded. A loud buzzer cut through the air. The red light flashed above sensor 12, and the conveyor belt ground to a halt. The glass stopped moving, and the noise level in the factory dropped instantly. Sensor 12 was a notorious problem. It was an optical sensor designed to detect crooked bottle caps, but it sat right next to the cardboard packer. Cardboard dust constantly floated in the air and settled on the lens, blinding the sensor and tricking the machine into thinking there was a jam. Jack walked over to the line. He pulled the rag from his back pocket, leaned over the yellow safety guard, and wiped the lens. It took 1 second. He hit the blue reset button. The machine roared back to life, the belt moved, and the downtime was exactly 14 seconds. Jack put the rag back in his pocket and turned to leave. "Hey!" The scream came from the walkway. Jack stopped and turned around. Brad was sprinting toward him, his face a bright shade of red. He skidded to a halt in front of Jack, breathing hard. "What do you think you are doing?" Brad shouted, pointing a trembling finger at the machine. "I cleaned the sensor," Jack said calmly. "It was dusty." "You stuck your hand into a live machine," Brad yelled. "I saw you. You reached over the guard. That is a massive safety violation. That is a Class A infraction." The operators nearby stopped working to watch the confrontation. "Brad, the machine was paused," Jack explained. "It's a 12-volt optical sensor. It takes 2 seconds to wipe. If I don't do it, the line stops every hour." "I don't care about the time," Brad snapped. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out a thick, spiral-bound book, the employee handbook. He fumbled with the pages until he found what he was looking for. "Read this," Brad commanded, shoving the book into Jack's chest. Jack took the book and looked at the highlighted paragraph. "Page 45, Brad recited. "If a safety sensor trips or malfunctions, the machine must be fully locked out and tagged out. The issue must be inspected and cleared by a certified safety technician before the machine can be restarted. Are you a certified safety technician, Jack?" Jack closed the book slowly. "No, Brad. I'm the lead engineer. The safety tech is a contractor named Gary. He lives an hour away." "Rules exist for a reason," Brad said, snatching the book back. "You are cutting corners because you are lazy. You are endangering this company." "If I lock out this machine every time a speck of dust hits that lens," Jack said, his voice dropping, "we will never finish a shift. We will lose thousands of dollars." "That is not your call to make," Brad snapped. "I am the manager. You are the subordinate. You will follow the manual to the letter. Is that clear?" Jack looked at the young manager. "Is that a direct order?" Jack asked. "Yes," Brad said. "In fact, I'm going to make sure everyone knows it." That afternoon, the email went out. Jack was at his desk when the notification pinged. It was sent to the entire, all-plant distribution list. Subject: Zero Tolerance Policy. Effective immediately, there will be a zero-tolerance policy regarding unauthorized maintenance. No operators or engineers are to bypass safety protocols to clear faults. If a machine stops due to a sensor fault, you must: first, lock out and tag out the machine. Second, contact a vendor or certified safety technician. And third, wait for approval before restart. Any deviation from this manual will result in immediate termination. No exceptions. Brad, plant manager. Jack read the email twice. He focused on the phrase, "no exceptions." He printed the email out. He took a roll of tape and taped the piece of paper to the side of his computer monitor, right at eye level. Then, he leaned back in his chair and waited. It took 2 days for the trap to spring. It was Friday afternoon, 3:45 p.m. The rush order was in its final stretch. They needed to bottle another 10,000 units by 5 p.m. to fill the last truck. The drivers outside were pacing and checking their watches. The plant was vibrating with speed. Then, the alarm cut through the noise. The red light above the labeler flashed. The belt stopped. The silence rushed back into the room. Sensor 12. The dust had struck again. Every operator on the line looked at Jack. They waited for him to walk over, wipe it with his rag, and hit reset so they could go home on time. Jack stood up from his chair in the control room. He picked up his coffee cup and took a slow sip. He walked out onto the floor, but he didn't walk toward the sensor. He walked toward the lockout station mounted on the wall. He took a red padlock from the board. He took a heavy plastic tag that read "Danger. Do not operate." He took a permanent marker from his pocket. He walked over to the main breaker box for line 4. He pulled the heavy lever down. The sound of the power dying was a loud, metallic clunk. The lights on the control panel faded to black. The hum of the motors vanished. He threaded his padlock through the breaker handle and clicked it shut. He signed the tag with the date and time, then zip-tied the tag to the lock. He put his hands in his pockets and walked back to the control room. He sat down and looked at the email taped to his monitor. 30 seconds later, the door to the control room flew open. "Why is the line down?" Brad screamed. He was holding his radio, his eyes wide with panic. "We have trucks waiting. We have an hour left." Jack swiveled his chair around and pointed through the glass window at the red light on the labeler. "Sensor 12 tripped, boss." Brad looked at the sensor, then back at Jack. "Well, go wipe it off. Let's go." We're burning daylight. Jack didn't move. He tapped a piece of paper taped to his monitor. I can't do that, Brad. What are you talking about? I'm not a certified safety technician, Jack said, his voice calm. Per your email, subject line, 0 tolerance. Cleaning that sensor without a certified inspection would be unauthorized maintenance. It would be a violation of policy. I'd hate to get fired. Brad stared at him. The color drained from his face as he looked at the email, then at the dead production line. Don't be smart with me, Brad hissed. Just go fix the damn sensor. I can't, Jack said. I've already applied the lockout/tagout. The machine is dead. I've logged the ticket with the vendor. You logged a ticket? Brad's voice cracked. Yes. I called Gary. Gary? Brad asked. The contractor? That's the one, Jack said. I called him immediately, per the manual. How long will he be? Brad screamed. Is he close? Jack checked his watch, making a show of calculating the time. Well, it's 4 p.m. on a Friday. Traffic is terrible coming out of the city. And Gary charges double for emergency after-hours calls, so he usually takes his time getting his gear together. He said he'll be here in about 3 hours. 3 hours, Brad whispered. He looked out the window. The factory floor was completely silent. 50 workers were standing around with their arms crossed, waiting for instructions. We lose $500 a minute when the line is down, Brad said, reciting the figure like a prayer. 3 hours, that's $90,000. Plus the contract penalties. Plus the overtime. Brad turned to the door. I'll do it myself. He started to march toward the production line. Jack stood up and moved fast. He stepped into the doorway, blocking Brad's path with his broad shoulders. Whoa, Brad, Jack said, his voice dropping the polite facade. You can't do that. Get out of my way, Brad snarled. The machine is locked out, Jack said firmly. My padlock is on that breaker. By federal law, OSHA Regulation 1910-147, the only person who can remove that lock is the person who put it there. If you try to cut that lock, or if you touch that machine while it's tagged, that is a federal criminal offense. I will have to report you to the safety board. Jack leaned in slightly. And per your email, there are no exceptions. Brad stopped. He looked at Jack's chest, then at the padlock hanging in the distance. He looked at the operators watching the scene unfold. He realized he was trapped. He had built the cage, locked the door, and handed the key to the man he had insulted. Fine, Brad spat. We wait for Gary. The next 3 hours were excruciating. The factory floor, usually hot and loud, began to cool down. The silence was heavy and uncomfortable. You could hear the hum of the vending machines in the break room from 50 feet away. Brad paced. He walked the length of the catwalk. He walked circles in the office. He made phone calls to his superiors, his voice rising in panic as he tried to explain why the rush order wasn't shipping. Jack sat in his chair. He finished his coffee. He read the news on his phone. He watched the clock on the wall tick. At 4:30 p.m., the trucks outside started honking. At 5 p.m., the shift ended, but they had to keep the entire crew on overtime because the order wasn't finished. At 6 p.m., the main overhead lights clicked off on their automatic timer. The factory floor was plunged into shadow, bathed only in the dim glow of the security lighting. Brad sat on the floor of the control room, his head in his hands, looking like a man watching his career burn down in slow motion. At 7:15 p.m., the back door buzzer sounded. Gary walked in. Gary was a man in his 60s who moved at the speed of a glacier. He was carrying a heavy tool bag and eating a sandwich. Evening, gents, Gary said, chewing slowly. Got an emergency call? Something explode. Brad scrambled up from the floor. Gary, thank God. The labeler. Sensor 12. It's a critical failure. We need a full diagnostic immediately. Gary looked at the sensor, squinting in the dim light. Is the machine locked out? Gary asked. Yes, Jack said. Tag is on the breaker. All right, Gary said. He walked over to the sensor. He put on his reading glasses. He leaned in close. He took his thumb and wiped the lens. He looked at the smudge of gray dust on his thumb, then wiped it on his work pants. "Done," Gary said. Brad blinked, confused. "What?" "It was dust," Gary said. "Dirty sensor. Happens all the time." Gary turned to Jack. "You can unlock it now, Jack." Jack walked to the breaker box. He unlocked his padlock. He cut the zip tie and removed the tag. He threw the heavy lever back up. The power returned with a loud clunk. Jack walked back to the labeler and hit the blue reset button. The machine roared to life. The belt moved. The bottles started clinking again. The total downtime had been 3 hours and 15 minutes. The actual repair had taken 4 seconds. Gary pulled a clipboard from his bag and wrote out an invoice. He tore off the yellow copy and handed it to Brad. "That'll be $1,200 for the call-out," Gary said. 2-hour minimum, plus the weekend rate. Have a good night." Gary walked out. Brad stood there, holding the invoice. His hand was shaking visibly. He looked at the running machine. He looked at Jack. Jack didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He just pulled a rag from his back pocket and wiped a spot of grease off the railing. Monday morning, the atmosphere in the plant was heavy. It felt like the air before a thunderstorm. A black Mercedes was parked in the spot reserved for the regional vice president. At 9 a.m., the intercom clicked. Jack to the main office. Brad to the main office. Jack walked up the stairs to the administrative wing and entered the conference room. Mr. Henderson, the regional VP, sat at the head of the polished wood table. He was a man who did not appreciate surprises. On the table in front of him was a production report. The numbers were printed in red ink. Brad was already sitting there. He looked like he hadn't slept all weekend. His tie was crooked and his face was pale. "Sit," Henderson said. Jack sat down. "We lost the client contract," Henderson said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "They canceled a standing order this morning. They said we are unreliable." He tapped the report with his index finger. "We lost $200,000 in missed production, overtime wages, and contract penalties on Friday, in a single shift." Henderson looked at Brad. "Brad, your report says the line was down for over 3 hours due to a catastrophic sensor failure." Brad nodded vigorously. "Yes, sir. It was a major malfunction. We had to follow safety protocols." Henderson turned to Jack. "Jack, the maintenance log from the contractor says, wipe dust off lens. Is that accurate?" "Yes, sir," Jack said. 3 hours, Henderson said softly. "For dust. Why, Jack? You've been here 15 years. You know how to wipe a sensor." Brad jumped in, his voice desperate. "That's what I told him. I ordered him to fix it. He refused. He sat in the control room and refused to work. It was insubordination." Jack didn't interrupt. He waited for Brad to finish. Then Jack reached into his pocket. He pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was wrinkled and had tape residue on the corners. He slid it across the table to Henderson. "I was following orders, sir," Jack said. "Strict adherence to the zero-tolerance policy regarding unauthorized maintenance." Henderson picked up the paper. He read the email. He read the part about the certified safety technician. He read the part about no exceptions. He read Brad's signature at the bottom. The room went completely silent. Henderson lowered the paper. He looked at Brad. "You sent this?" Henderson asked. I was trying to improve safety culture," Brad stammered. "I was trying to standardize. You required a certified vendor to wipe dust off a lens." Henderson asked. "And you threatened termination for anyone who touched it?" "Well, technically, yes, but I didn't think he would." "You didn't think he would follow your order?" Henderson cut him off. Henderson stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the parking lot. "Brad," Henderson said without turning around, "pack your things." "Sir, security will escort you to your desk. You are done." Brad stood up. He looked at Jack. He looked like he wanted to scream, but he didn't have the breath. He turned and walked out of the room. Henderson sighed and turned back to Jack. "You made your point, Jack," Henderson said. "I just followed the manual," Jack replied. "Right," Henderson said. He tore the email in half and dropped it in the trash can. "Get back to work. And Jack, wipe the sensors." "Yes, sir." Jack walked out of the office. He walked down the stairs to the factory floor. The noise hit him immediately. Collision of glass, the hiss of air. It was a symphony to his ears. He walked past line 4. Sensor 12 was blinking. The red light flashed, and the line stopped. Jack didn't break stride. He pulled a rag from his back pocket. He reached over the yellow guard. He wiped the dust. He hit the reset button. The line roared back to life. Jack walked into the control room, poured a fresh cup of coffee, sat down, and put his feet up on the desk. The monitors showed green lights across the board. Uptime was back to 99%.